Here are some memories about the landings in Normandy and the landings on southern France. "10 minutes past midnight, D-Day. In the dark, a British glider with 20 to 25 soldiers is flying into Normandy. Their aim is to capture 2 bridges east of Caen." Here is the map, and here is Caen, which is the capital of Normandy. So their aim is to capture 2 bridges east of Caen. Their pilot lands them a few feet from the first bridge, which is quite an accomplishment. But they also land at about 100 miles an hour, and it comes as quite a shock to everybody. And it is also a complete surprise for the Germans who are guarding the bridge. The result? A quick success, and incredibly quick. The 2 bridges have been liberated. But everything went very well, so well that they did not notice that their leader was missing. And in fact, he was the first casualty. The lieutenant in charge of the commando died in the arms of the soldier who tells the story. That soldier, Willie Parr, comments, "I aged so fast in 1944. On their glider, the British soldiers had scratched a message for the Germans: "The channel stopped you, but not us." A second memory. D-Day, 2 o'clock in the morning. A special message on the radio, 2 lines from a poem by Verlaine, "Les sanglots longs des violons de l'automne," the long sobs of autumn violins. This was the signal, the secret signal for the landings. And this special message is captured by the French resistance in Normandy. And it brings about a meeting in neighboring woods where a small group decides to blow up a main railroad line between Caen and Laval. We've already mentioned Caen. Laval is to the south, and of course the Germans could rush reinforcements and tanks on special trains. Well, they decided to blow up the line between Caen and Laval in order to prevent those reinforcements and those tanks from reaching the capital of Normandy. 5 men ride off in the dark on bicycles with plastic explosive in their rucksacks. They blow up the rails. They blow up a stretch of 60 yards long. It will take quite a bit of time to repair that. And they vanish. 5 men from the Normandy underground, 14 groups, 16,000 active members, 6,000 of them armed. Needless to say, hundreds of these patriots have died. Here we come now to our third memory of the landings in Normandy. Among the US Army forces landing on Utah Beach. Here is Utah Beach. Here, by the way, is Omaha, which was such a costly enterprise in the number of men who died. Well, the landing I'm discussing takes place on Utah Beach And the man who tells us this memory is Ted Liska. The tide took us 1.5 miles away from our target, which may have saved our lives because the original landing area was covered by heavy, very heavy German artillery. As we went inland, we ran into flooded areas. We had to wade through them during 2 hours and became ideal targets during those 2 hours. Ted Liska remembers the first German prisoners. They were screaming, "We're not Germans, we're Russians, we're Czechs, we're Polish." Ted Liska has been coming back to Normandy, that he calls his second country, and he has married in France in 1954. I will let him conclude. I swore to myself never to forget the guys who paid with their life for the success of D-Day. Talk about them today. Talk about these young dead that I remember. Talk about their laughter, their worries, the hell they raised, and their dreams. Talk about them. Now, during that period, during the period of the landings in Normandy, I was living in a small town in southern France. In southern France, the landings, as you probably remember, took place in mid-August. Well, I had to work like every young man in that area. We had to give 2 weeks of work to the Germans because they were trying to set up a defense line along the Mediterranean. Now, here we are, the Mediterranean, and here is the town where I was hiding, Draguignan, very small town, very quiet little town. One fine day, I received a paper from the French authorities telling me that I had to come and serve 2 weeks along the Mediterranean, and that was work, defense work for the Germans. Now, the problem was when you received an invitation like that, what did you do with it? I, unfortunately, could not afford to ignore it. The reason? I was living in that area, in Draguignan, with false papers. I had been hiding there. This was the second year of my hiding. I was hiding there with my parents, and we had come down from Paris and had had experience with concentration camps and so on because we were Jewish. Well, what was my choice? If I did not go and the police tried to follow through on my not going, I could put my parents in danger. So I went. And what were we supposed to do along the Mediterranean these 2 weeks where we were volunteered? We were setting up something that has to do with what I was telling you in my first story about the glider that brought the 25 British soldiers in. We were supposed to dig holes, and in those holes to plant pine trees. These were called Rommel asparagus. That was the term that was being used between us. And with those pine trees planted, the Germans thought that gliders would not be able to come in. Those pine trees would constitute a forest of obstacles in the path of incoming gliders. Well, now try and imagine this situation. We are about 60 young men between 18 and 22, and we're working in a huge field. It's really a vineyard in which we're working. And there's one old German soldier on a bicycle that is supposed to keep watch on us. Now, we're very well organized very soon. We always have one or two guys on guard, and they tell us if the German is coming our way. When he's coming our way, we start digging furiously those holes for the Romaine asparagus. The moment he passes and goes elsewhere, work stops. I don't think we dug a lot of holes during the 2 weeks I was along the Mediterranean. But we were fed by the German army. And we were not fed very generously. Try and remember that we were 18 to 22 years old and living outdoors and doing some physical work, as little as we could, but still some physical work. What we got was soup and a slice of dark bread. That was our meal 3 times a day. Needless to say, we were hungry and trying to find supplements. Well, along the vineyard where we worked, there was a big wall, and on the other side of the wall, there were several cherry trees. And we had again organized ourselves very well. We had 1 or 2 very good climbers that would go up the wall, get into the cherry tree, fill up a hat, and then come back and share with the rest of the group. Meanwhile, 1 or 2 guys were standing guard in case the farmer would appear and not the German. So on the one hand, we were watching for the German, and on the other hand, we were watching for the farmer. Well, one fine day, our system did not work out. And all of a sudden, we saw the farmer charging down, running in our direction, waving his hands. And we started sort of trying to collect ourselves and say to him, look, we're sorry. Yes, we have been stealing your cherries, but we're hungry and we don't get much food. And besides, if you want, we'll be very glad to reimburse you for your cherries. And the farmer at that point, still waving his arms, yells out, "The Americans have landed!" It was June 6th. So that was my contact with the stories I've told you in the first part of my presentation. Now, my story starts on August 15th, when the Americans landed along the Mediterranean. And quite a few of them were coming from Sicily, from Italy, from North Africa. Most of the ones I met were veterans. They were not new soldiers, new recruits, essentially. Well, because my parents were actors, I had traveled with them to England just before the war. They put me in a school and I had to learn English very quickly in order to survive. I probably was one of the rare young men in Draguignan who spoke English fluently. So, the next morning after the landings and after we had heard the tremendous noise of guns and seen projectors trying to catch airplanes coming over us, I decided that morning very early to go down into Draguignan and to speak with whoever was in charge and to say, is there anything I can do to help since I speak English? I met the man in charge, who was a captain of the French underground. His name was Fontes. I'd never met him before, and he didn't know me, but he received me with open arms. I was very surprised, because here I was in shorts. I have no experience of the war. I didn't know how to handle a weapon. And here was this man saying, "Oh, you speak English? Good, we need you. We need you very badly." And I said, "Well, yes, okay, what for? What can I do?" And he said, "What I would like you to do is go out and see if you can meet the paratroopers that have come in first and see if you can guide them in order to neutralize the German stronghold which dominates the town of Draguignan." And I said to him, but I thought you had liberated Draguignan. And he said, we think we have liberated Draguignan, but should the Germans decide to come down from their stronghold into town, we'll be slaughtered. I said, well, what sort of weapons do you have? I see a machine gun in the middle of the square. And he said, this is for show. We've put it up there for morale purposes. There is a key piece missing in it, and we cannot use it. He said, anyway, we need help, and we need help quickly. So I said, okay, I think I'll do my best. What can I do for you? And he said, you will have to wait for night to come, and I will give you another volunteer of the French underground. He will accompany you, and he will have a Tommy gun. That was the only weapon that we had between ourselves. You will wait for the night, and you will leave town and walk in the direction of the sea. Draguignan being here, of course, we were supposed to walk southward in the direction of the sea. He said, and I hope that you can meet a unit of paratroopers, or maybe land forces coming in. But anyway, see if you can make contact with Americans. So we waited for the night. And night came, finally. And we started out of town, out of Draguignan, when it was pitch dark. Of course, during the period of the war, you were not supposed to have any lights that were visible. The bulbs were painted in blue, and you had to use special curtains in order to mask any lights. And if, for instance, a German or a French patrol working with the Germans, was walking around and could see a light, they would shoot at your window. So there we are, walking in complete darkness. And we're two young men, and one of us has a weapon, but I don't know how much experience he has with the weapon. And we are walking and listening very, very intently, because suppose we meet a German patrol and not the paratroopers. We didn't know which side they might be coming from. So we are walking, and from time to time we stop and we listen, and then we start again. And believe me, it seems very simple to be walking at night with no traffic. But it was a very difficult walk, and just to think of it, I start almost to sweat. Well, after some time, we had the strangest impression. It was as if, well, it's hard to explain. It was as if the night was moving. In that total darkness, there seemed to be a movement. We felt it more than we heard it. It was more a reaction from our skin than a reaction from our ears, and certainly our eyes were of no help whatsoever. And finally, here is the explanation of what we felt was approaching. There were two lines of paratroopers following the road. They were coming from the sea, we were walking in the direction of the sea, and they were in camouflage suits, and they had oil on their faces, so that you could not see them. You could not see them standing out in the night. I asked to be led to their leader and explained the situation to him, and he said, well, where is that German stronghold? And I said, well, it's right above the town of Draguignan. And he said, well, can you lead us to it? And I said, the young man who is with me is from this region. I think he is a hunter. I think he knows the paths very well. And I think he can guide your unit. And so we spent the rest of the night going through the woods, climbing over walls, And finally, in the early hours of the morning, we were above the German stronghold. The paratrooper unit had small mortars that they carried with them, and they started using them. That was my first mission. After that, while paratroopers were still around, I had a series of other missions, and I was given a special paper by the leader of the French underground. With that paper, I could stop any truck that passed and go with the truck and the truck driver in the direction of the woods that surrounded the town, because gliders had been dropping supplies there, weapons, ammunition, medical supplies, all sorts of things, and our job was to try and get them so that the Germans, because there were still Germans around, would not get their hands on them first. And so that was my job. That was my job, and I did several of these round trips, bringing back what we found in the woods. But we found something else in the woods. We found an American paratrooper lieutenant. I think his name was Hansen, if I remember well. And Hansen had been cut off from his unit. And he said that there were snipers in the woods, and several of his men had been killed, and he was alone. He was alone, walking in those woods, trying to find a way out, but not knowing the area. And this had been going on, I think, for several days and nights, and he couldn't afford to go to sleep because he was afraid that the sniper would get at him. So we took him back. We dropped all the supplies we were going to bring back. We took him back to Draguignan, and I'll always remember we left him in the lobby of a little hotel. I think it was a little hotel, and he was so tired that he practically fell on a mattress. And I remember his back. He had taken his shirt off, and on his back there were several mosquitoes that had landed. He wasn't paying any attention. The man slept and slept and slept. Now that was my second series of missions. After that, the paratroopers were replaced by land forces, and the land forces were from the 36th Division, Texas. I offered to act as a liaison between them and the French underground. And I was not needed anymore in Draguignan, so I was given permission to leave with this American unit, and I went with them, and essentially what we did is we went from Draguignan practically all the way to the Alps, to Grenoble in the Alps, and we just went up following well, we were not exactly following the Rhone Valley, but we were going parallel to it in pretty mountainous terrain. Now my problem, my mission was essentially to make sure that wherever we arrived, if we stopped to try and contact as quickly as possible the French underground, get the information that they had, pass them on to the Americans, essentially. I did that several times until we sort of ran ahead of ourselves, it seems to me. Not that I knew what the plans were, but I think that we found ourselves cut off by a German tank division while we just didn't have the sort of equipment that we would have needed to be able to deal with them. And for the first time, I heard big guns shooting, and that was my initiation. And believe me, I don't think I'm a great hero, because even lying on the ground and hearing these things pass overhead, I felt that my legs were made of cotton. Well, anyway, what saved us was that another division came to our rescue, and I think that was the 45th. The 45th, which has as a symbol, I think, an eagle, a yellow eagle on a red background, or the other way around. But anyway, they were welcome with their tanks and their tank destroyers, because they were able to open up the path for us, and we were able to continue. Well, we continued, and we came up in the direction of Grenoble, that you know probably from the Winter Games. From Grenoble, we went up into the Alps in the direction of a mountain town called Briançon. And there, leaving Grenoble, well, first of all, as we arrived in Grenoble, there were two headquarters, the American headquarters and the French underground headquarters. And each headquarters had its set of maps. And as I looked at the French maps, I noticed that they were getting information that we were not getting. They were getting information that gradually there was a German pincer that was closing up on us and that was going to take us in, and we would have been staying inside Grenoble under very heavy artillery. Now, when I went back to the American map room, they didn't have this information, so I tried to be like a ping pong ball between the two rooms with their maps. Finally, if I remember well, I literally took the American colonel with me into the French map room and showed him the information that the French had. And the result is that we decided that it would be very, very wise to leave Grenoble as fast as possible, because we were not ready to fight against a very, very heavy German concentration of a group that came maybe from the Afrika Corps, Rommel's special corps, I think. I'm not fully sure about that. But I do know one thing: we left the town in the nick of time. And then we went to Briançon, that I mentioned before, and there we set up a sort of a defensive perimeter, and my role was then to check whoever passed through, was trying to pass through, to check papers and make sure that these were not either German or Italian infiltrators. In all of this, I was very lucky. Nothing happened to me, in spite of the fact that I had so little experience of military affairs. I was able to do my missions. I was even given permission to go back once or twice in the direction of Draguignan with special papers from my American company that enabled me to stop any American vehicle and get a ride in the direction of Draguignan, and then back from Draguignan to my unit. But eventually, I left the unit because I had some trouble with a leg, and second, we were approaching the time when school was going to start again, and I had come to the end of my secondary studies, and it was time for me to get ready for a very tough French exam, which is called le baccalauréat, the end of secondary studies in France. And I went back and discovered that there was a little monument at the place where the two of us had met the first Americans. And this is our monument. I saw it with my wife a few years later. It had been replaced by a bigger monument with the same thing on it, which said, "Here, the first members of the underground have met the first Americans." And it's in Draguignan. If you want to see it, see my monument. Here are some memories of the landings in France. I hope you've enjoyed them.